Some of the men came back with medals. Some came back with nothing. And some came back with wounds that had no names. I was 24 when the war ended. A nurse in training in a hospital that used to be a schoolhouse before the Red Cross painted over the blackboards. We had 3 beds in the emergency room, a half-broken sterilizer, and an operating lamp that buzzed when you looked at it wrong. But the worst part wasn't the equipment. It was the sentences we had to say too often. There's nothing more we can do. He's septic. It's a matter of hours now. And then came the miracle in a bottle. The first vial of penicillin I ever held came wrapped in wax paper. Dr. Franklin opened the package like it was made of glass. He didn't speak much, but that day, his hands trembled when he picked up the vial. "This will save people," he said. And then he added, almost in disbelief, "This will save people." I didn't fully understand. I'd read about it. We'd all heard the stories from military hospitals, how soldiers with blood infections were walking again. Men with bullet wounds that would have meant death were laughing within days. But it still felt like something that happened over there, not here. Not in our little town. Not in room 2 with the peeling paint and the clock that ticked 2 minutes slow. The first patient we used it on was a boy named Ray, 20 years old. Came home from France 2 months after the war ended. He hadn't been wounded in combat. He'd stepped on a nail behind a train station, helping unload crates of soap and powdered milk from military trucks. A nail. That's what almost killed him. The infection spread fast. By the time he got to us, his leg was swollen twice its size, and the smell of it turned my stomach. He was pale, sweating, and barely conscious. Dr. Franklin looked at me and said, "This is our test." We cleaned the wound again, gave Ray fluids. Then, with hands we washed 3 times each, we prepared the injection. The penicillin went in slow. Then we waited. The next 12 hours felt like standing on a ledge. I checked Ray's pulse every 30 minutes, held his hand when he thrashed in fevered sleep, changed his sheets when the sweat soaked through them, whispered things I couldn't remember later, just sounds to fill the air. And then, somewhere near dawn, I noticed something. His breathing had slowed. Not stopped, just settled. His forehead, which had been burning all night, was cool. Dr. Franklin walked in, looked at the chart, then at the boy. And then he smiled. Not a grin, not a joke, but a real, earned, human smile. "He's going to keep the leg," he said. And I almost cried right there. We'd never seen anything like it. The infection retreated like a tide. By the 2nd day, the swelling had reduced. By the 3rd, Ray was awake, asking for eggs and something stronger than water. By the 5th, he was standing, with help, of course, and laughing like he hadn't been dancing with death a week before. Word spread faster than fever. People came in asking if the medicine from the army was available. Farmers with infections that had lingered for months. A schoolteacher with pneumonia. A woman whose husband refused to admit he'd been hiding a wound on his back for 3 weeks. We used it sparingly. We didn't have much. But what we used worked. But medicine wasn't the only thing changing. Attitudes were changing too. Before the war, illness was something you bore. You went to church. You drank broth. You waited. Doctors came when it was bad. But there was a kind of quiet acceptance that sickness was part of life, and so was dying. But now people expected to be saved. And honestly, it was beautiful. I remember a mother, her name was June, bringing in her baby girl with a red rash spreading up her chest. In the past, we'd have said, "Keep her cool, watch for fever." Now, she looked me in the eye and said, "You can fix this, right?" Not as a question, as a promise. And we did. For the first time, our tools felt powerful. Our gowns didn't feel like costumes. The hospital didn't feel like the place people came to say goodbye. It felt like the place they came to begin again. Of course, not everything could be cured. Some boys came home with wounds too deep for medicine. Some hearts broke quietly, without infection. But it was different now. Even when someone slipped away, we didn't say, "There's nothing we can do." We said, "We did everything we could," and meant it. I still remember the way Ray looked when he came back 2 months later. He brought flowers. Real ones, not wildflowers or weeds, but a store-bought bouquet, which meant he'd saved his pennies. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit and walked with a slight limp. He hugged Dr. Franklin, then me, and said, "I'm getting married next spring. I'd like to still be around for that." And then he winked. We all laughed. But I felt something deep in my chest that day, a kind of shift, like we'd turned a corner on a long, dark road. Not every man wanted to be saved. Some came back from the war with wounds you couldn't point to on a chart. No fever, no infection, no injury you could clean or wrap. But you could see it, in the way they stood, or didn't, in the way their eyes stayed locked on a corner of the room, like something was still happening there, even if no one else could see it. One of them was Private Tom Grady. He came in late one Thursday night, not carried, not limping, just quiet. His wife brought him, said he hadn't spoken in 3 days. Not since the letter arrived about a friend who hadn't made it home. He didn't have a fever, no obvious injury, but his pulse was fast, his pupils wide, and his hands trembling. We tried to ask him questions. No response. Dr. Franklin said, "Give him a day, maybe 2. That first night, I sat by his bed after rounds. He didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't blink, it seemed, just stared straight ahead. I brought him broth. Nothing. I read from the newspaper. No change. At one point I said softly, "You're safe now. It's over." And for just a moment, his lip moved, like he wanted to argue, but didn't have the words. Dr. Franklin was hopeful. He always was. He said men needed time, patience, quiet. But on the third day, Tom pulled out his put on his uniform jacket, and tried to walk out. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Back," he said. "To the front. To where I left myself," he said. "I'm not here." We kept him for a week. Not because we had anything else to give him, but because we didn't want him to go where we couldn't follow. He wasn't angry. He wasn't violent. Just absent. Until the last day. It was raining. I remember that clearly. He asked for paper. We gave him some. He wrote a letter. When I passed his room later that night, he looked at me for the first time, really looked, and said, "Tell her I almost stayed." Then he handed me the envelope. By morning, he was gone. We never found out where he went. His wife came crying, searching. We filed a report. Weeks passed. Nothing. But I kept that line in my head. I almost stayed. That was the war speaking, through his mouth. Not all miracles come in vials. But there were other patients. Ones who did stay. Like Mrs. Lacey, a teacher who'd nearly died of pneumonia 2 winters in a row. She came in coughing blood, gray with exhaustion. A decade ago, she'd have been buried before the week was out. But now, penicillin, oxygen, close monitoring. 3 days later, she was teaching me how to win at checkers. She called me bright eyes, even when I was bone-tired. Then there was Charlie Doyle, a boy of 11 who caught a bone infection from a scraped knee. His mother was hysterical, said she'd already lost one son to a fever in 38. Dr. Franklin let me give the injection. My hands shook. Charlie cried, not from pain, but from fear. He asked if he'd have to lose his leg. I told him no. And for the first time in my life, I said it without doubt. Not every case was dramatic. Some were small victories. A mailman with strep throat, back on his route in 2 days. A farmer with infected blisters, who stopped by a week later with a pie to say thank you. A young bride with a post-surgical wound that healed faster than even the doctor expected. Each one was a moment. A little shift, like the world was remembering how to heal. Still, there were moments of failure. A girl with diphtheria, Too late. A man with tetanus who hadn't told anyone until it was far gone. A baby born too soon. Not even penicillin could save them. And each time, it felt like the light flickered in the hallway. Dr. Franklin once said, "Medicine is mostly timing. We give it names, call it science, but really, it's about when." Too late. Too soon. Just in time. We learn to respect that. To listen not just with stethoscopes, but with silence. To hear what a patient wasn't saying. One night, after we lost the baby, I went out behind the clinic and sat on the steps. The rain had just started. I didn't cry. Not then. I just felt empty. Then I heard footsteps. It was Ray, the boy from the nail wound. The one who'd nearly lost his leg. He'd started volunteering at the hospital part-time. Said he owed us more than flowers. He sat beside me. Neither of us said a word for a long while. Then he whispered, "You know, I still have that limp." I smiled. "I still hear the hum of the lamp in room 2, I said. He laughed, quietly, and then said, "I think you saved more than my leg." Maybe we did. Maybe that was the real medicine. Not just what we gave, but how we looked at them. How we stayed in the room when the chart said there was nothing more to do. How we whispered, "Let's wait a little longer." Sometimes that's all someone needs. To not be left alone with the noise in their head. By 1948, the hospital no longer smelled like bleach and fear. It smelled like motion. Rubber soles on linoleum. Fresh gauze. Coffee cooling on metal desks. And something else, something newer. Something like hope, left uncapped on a tray. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were building, planning, restoring. We had crossed a line, and now we were walking into a future none of us had expected to survive, much less rebuild. That was the year a man named Joseph Alden came through our doors. He wasn't local, said he was just passing through, but his hand, or what remained of it, said otherwise. The left side was wrapped in stained cloth. It hung at his side like an unanswered question. He had the walk of a man used to pain, not resisting it, just carrying it like a suitcase. Dr. Franklin examined him gently. "Explosion," Joseph said. "A shell," he added. "Didn't like the way I was holding my wrench." He laughed. A sharp, bitter sound, but not without humor. "What did they do for it overseas?" Franklin asked. Joseph shrugged. "Cut what they had to, wrapped what they couldn't, then sent me home with a medal and a handshake." We unwrapped the bandage slowly. The hand was mostly gone. 2 fingers remained, twisted and tight against the palm. The skin around the wrist was glossy, too smooth, the kind of healing that speaks of fire. "What do you want to do?" Franklin asked. Joseph looked at the doctor, then at me, then at his own hand. "I want to hold a cup of coffee again," he said, without asking someone else to lift it. 3 weeks later, we received our first prosthetic kit. It wasn't fancy, leather straps, carved wooden extensions, a few joints that clicked too loudly. But it was something. Dr. Franklin didn't have experience with prosthetics. Neither did I. But Joseph? He had ideas. He sketched them on paper napkins, described adjustments, showed Franklin how to alter pressure points using scraps from a mechanic's belt. "I don't want it to look real," he said. "I want it to work." And by the end of that month, it did. Crude, visible, ugly maybe. But when he lifted that cup of coffee to his lips, with both hands, we all applauded like fools. Joseph wept. And that was the first time I saw Franklin cry, too. Joseph didn't leave right away. He started staying late, helping us modify other devices. He built a footplate for a boy who had one leg shorter than the other. He rigged a spring-loaded grip for an older farmer who couldn't bend his fingers. He called it giving them their names back. When someone can tie their own shoes again, they stop being a case and go back to being Charlie, Earl, Marvin, Helen. One day, I asked Joseph why he hadn't gone back to work, wherever home was. He looked at me and said, "I used to build machines. Now I help fix people. One matters more." By then, things were changing fast. A truck arrived one morning with new supplies, portable X-ray film, an early defibrillator, sterile suture kits that didn't look like they belonged in a sewing basket. A young doctor came to observe. Fresh from university, crisp lab coat, wide eyes. He asked Dr. Franklin, "Do you think we'll cure everything soon?" Franklin looked at me before answering. "No," he said, "but we'll forget how not to try." I remember my last week at the hospital. Not because it was sad. It wasn't. It was full, busy, alive. One patient brought in cookies. Another brought flowers. A little girl, no older than 8, handed me a note that said, "Thank you for making Daddy feel better." I still have it. My final shift ended with the night rounds. I walked the hall slowly, touching the door frames like they were old friends. In room 3, a man recovering from gallbladder surgery snored like a freight train. In room 5, a teenage boy watched the rain through the window, her bag glowing like moonlight. And in room 2, my room 2, a woman rested with her newborn beside her. She looked at me as I entered. I smiled. She smiled. "No complications," I whispered. "Thank you," she said. And I realized, we had gone from "nothing more can be done" to "you're going to be just fine." That night, I left through the back door. The same steps where I once cried after a baby we couldn't save. The same steps where Ray told me I saved more than his leg. The same steps where Joseph showed me his first working prototype. I paused, and I wept, not from sadness, but from the weight of having been there, of having stood at the edge of a broken world, and watched it take its first steps forward. Now, all these years later, when I visit hospitals, as a patient, mostly, I still hear echoes. A tray clattering, a monitor beep, a nurse humming quietly to herself. And I remember, not the pain, not the failures, not the hours without sleep, but the hands, the voices, the slow, stubborn return of hope. They call it innovation. I call it people refusing to give up on each other.